If you've been tasked with the selection of cloud computing platform from your organization, you had best listen closely to our report today. You probably have already heard that selecting the right cloud platform is not an easy thing to do. This is one case where one size definitely does not fit all. In this report, we'll look to clear some of the confusion that surrounds the various cloud platforms. We'll talk about IT and business benefits and delve into the potential risk factors with cloud platforms. In addition, expert advice and best practices will be offered in order that viewers can make the very most of their enterprise cloud computing interests. Hello, I'm Michael Quinlan, and welcome to our report, Cloud Platforms, Opportunities and Risk Factors. This report features expert Stanton Jones, Emerging Technology Analyst for Information Services Group. ISG is a leading technology insight, market intelligence, and advisory services company. The firm supports private and public sector organizations with research, benchmarking, consulting, and managed services in order to optimize their operational environment and strengthen their business. There are several teaching points in our program. First, we'll present an overview of cloud platforms and learn why they are fast becoming such a critical part of enterprise IT and business today. Next, we'll drill down and outline the many benefits cloud platforms can bring to organizations. Advice on selecting cloud platforms will also be offered. When it comes to technology change, there are always risks. So we'll take time to discuss the risk factors to keep top of mind. In our concluding segment, we'll look ahead and consider what the future may hold for cloud platforms. In our first segment, we'll offer an overview of cloud platforms and discuss why they are so critical to IT and business today. Did you know that the cloud computing platform you select will likely hold the key to the success or failure of your enterprise IT project? Not an exaggeration. That statement is really quite true. It's critical when developing and deploying applications on the cloud, you get the platform right the first time. So size up your platform choices and carefully consider the details of the project, what you're trying to accomplish, the costs and risk factors. Once you've done that, compare your needs and requirements with what the platform solution providers have to offer. Now, there is no magic formula, no one platform that will be the be-all and end-all. There will have to be compromises, no matter the choices made. So to help us learn more about cloud computing platforms and help guide good decision-making about them, we invite expert and IT consultant Stanton Jones to the program. Stanton, it's a pleasure to welcome you back.
Thanks, Mike. I really appreciate the opportunity and excited to talk with you about cloud platforms.
Now, Stanton, to set the stage for our report, tell us about cloud platforms and why making the right decision about selecting one is so critical for enterprise IT and business today.
Sure. So cloud platforms are sort of the middle part of the cloud computing stack. Cloud platforms are essentially development environments for application developers. So the unique benefit to cloud platforms is that it combines the underlying infrastructure that developers need to build applications with what's called the runtime, which is essentially the environment that the programming language runs in. And it sort of creates an environment where developers can go create applications and programs without having to rely heavily on infrastructure teams.
So once you commit to a platform, must you then place all enterprise applications on the cloud, leaving nothing on internal systems from that point forward? And what if a cloud-based solution is deemed too risky for one reason or another?
Sure. So, and it's a good point that, and this is one of the things that we talk with organizations a lot about, is that there are very few large Fortune 500, for example, organizations that are going to move all of their applications to the cloud. Typically what we're seeing is that it's specific workloads that move, and one of those choices when they move workloads is data security. And so focusing on the type of data that you're going to be moving into the cloud platform is really critical. If organizations, for example, choose to move an application that has some really high-risk data to it to the cloud, that may preclude them from specific platforms. So that data security risk is real, but it's really got to focus on what type of data are you actually moving. And so a lot of times what we see is organizations wholesale saying, no, it won't work in the cloud because we have data security risks. So what we encourage organizations to do is really drill down into the specific data set by column and look at what pieces of data are you actually moving into a cloud platform. And sometimes you can find that there's only a really small percentage of the data that maybe has some compliance requirements about it. And being able to keep those back in the data center and move everything else into the cloud platform is becoming a more and more viable option today.
Next, we'll drill down and outline the advantages of cloud platforms, present advice on the selection process, and review several risk factors we need to be aware of. Open any tech news webpage and be prepared to be bombarded with various vendor success stories about cloud. IT decision makers should avoid this hype and take a very deliberate step back from the fray to carefully weigh their cloud options. There are an increasing number of cloud vendors making promises about an ever-increasing number of cloud solutions out there that, quite frankly, can leave even the most knowledgeable IT professionals a bit confused. So to make a successful move to cloud, do your due diligence, ask for help from outside independent consultants when you need it, and above all, make sure what you're buying matches the needs and requirements of the organization. To learn more about how to maximize the benefits and minimize the risks with cloud platforms, let's return to our expert, Stanton Jones. Now, Stanton, let's take a moment to detail the actual benefits the cloud platforms bring to bear. Things like rapid deployment, lower cost, and risk. Could you explain?
Absolutely. So there's really kind of three key benefits of cloud platforms. Number one, you mentioned, is much faster time to market. And that really we see as the key benefit to all cloud solutions, whether it's infrastructure or application platforms. So the ability to build and test and deploy an application on a cloud platform can be much faster than the traditional model. So it's sometimes difficult to quantify in a business case what that business benefit is about getting to market faster than doing it inside, because a lot of times that cost of that application may actually be more than doing it on premises, but then there's a benefit to getting it to the market faster. So there absolutely is, and we really see as the number one kind of key benefit is speed. So the ability to dramatically speed up the provisioning cycle for getting applications out to market. Another key benefit is, you mentioned risk. There is a certain component of risk reduction by modernizing applications. So we see a lot of organizations today that have legacy applications that are no longer supported by the vendors, and a lot of times those are supported by one or two key people inside the organization, some mission critical applications. So by modernizing applications, which you inherently have to do in order to get them onto these cloud platforms, there's a pretty significant risk reduction there. And then finally, kind of the third key benefit would be around the reduction in capital spend. Sometimes there would be a reduction in operational spend if, for example, the organization is able to put an application onto a cloud platform and decrease reliance on the infrastructure that's in their data center and the need to constantly provision and upgrade that infrastructure when they only need it, maybe for dev test for certain times of the week or times of the year. That infrastructure may sit unused. And so there is a cost benefit to being able to use those platforms and have less reliance on that internal infrastructure.
Now, what size organization sees the most benefits by implementing cloud platforms? Is this just for startups, or can medium-sized and large corporations also benefit?
Absolutely. Most of the pickup today with cloud platforms is, as you mentioned, small to medium-sized businesses and startups. They're really the ones that are sort of driving both the innovation and the usage of the cloud platforms. We are starting to see, although it's still fairly nascent, large enterprises look at cloud platforms. So are they appropriate for large enterprises? Absolutely. But they tend to be more focused on and more appropriate for specific workloads. And so when I say workload, I mean an application, rather than a wholesale move of all the legacy application portfolios onto a cloud platform. Picking a specific workload that has, for example, a real spiky usage pattern. So if it's a highly seasonal application for potentially a consumer packaged goods company, that can be a good candidate for a large enterprise to take advantage of a cloud platform rather than an application that sort of just sits in a steady state.
And Stanton, if you had to give an assessment to a CIO about selecting cloud platforms and the determining factors to keep in mind, what would you say?
So many, and most in fact, large IT organizations have already set some broad-based standards about the development languages that they develop applications in. So that could be Java, it could be .NET, lots of other different types of applications and development languages that organizations use. And IT tends to think about it that way, about here's the development languages we've standardized on, therefore we want to find the right fit for either on-premises or on a cloud platform. So no matter what, it's going to be critical for a CIO and an IT leader to find a match in terms of the development language that they're using today for two reasons. Number one is interoperability with other applications, and number two, their existing staff. having to retrain an entire staff on a new development language is a huge undertaking for a large IT organization. And again, that goes back to why focusing on specific workloads, starting small, more of an iterative approach is what we see and what we counsel clients on is the best approach to cloud platforms, because you can start to try applications out, maybe potentially a new development language. And if you find the language is not working, or if my staff doesn't like using it, or we're not getting there, it's easy to exit as well. So rather than making these huge commitments to a new platform, we find that organizations are doing it on a sort of smaller, more iterative scale. I think that's really the key guidance I tend to give to IT organizations, is making sure to find that right fit of how it fits in with their enterprise profile today, but also don't be afraid of trying new, but starting small when you try new.
Now, Stanton, we are all aware that with any significant technology change, there's always risk. So when it comes to cloud platforms, what are the risks we need to keep top of mind?
Sure. There's really kind of two or three key risks. I would say number one is there's still some dissonance between what IT organizations, and specifically development organizations, how they operate today and how these cloud platforms operate. So today, development teams have a really strong reliance on the infrastructure teams to take care of the underlying infrastructure, so the servers, the switches, the routers that run and sort of power that application. In a cloud platform world, that's taken care of by the vendor. However, the developer takes on more responsibility for where the vendor leaves off on the infrastructure. So oftentimes we are finding that developers are sort of underestimating that level of effort, both to ensure that that infrastructure is scalable and secure. So there's a risk there in that developers don't understand necessarily what they're getting themselves into when they get into a cloud platform. Again, why it's important to start small and use a more iterative approach. I think there's sort of the second key risk is there's a lot of discussion in the market around fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and FUD of lock-in. So the idea that if I choose to use one of these platforms, I'm going to be stuck with it forever. We tend to push back on that a bit, mainly because if you look at today, if an organization selects a tier 1 ERP system or an office productivity suite, and they roll that out to their entire organization, it's not like they can easily switch off of that today. So no matter what you do, whether it's on premises or in cloud, there's always going to be some component to lock in with that selection. But that's where I think it's really important to go into that cloud platform selection, understanding that if it goes well, that small sort of organic thing can grow very big, very, very quickly. And then you could potentially be in a lock-in situation where you didn't plan on using it as your standard development environment.
Out of all the risk factors you've mentioned, the one that really stands out in my mind is the thought of trusting a service provider with critical data and applications. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely it is. And so, we talk a lot about, trust but verify. In the traditional world, so of buying third-party services and in outsourcing, that trust but verify works pretty well because you're putting your trust in the provider, but you're able to go verify, typically through an on-site audit and a lot of custom testing and screening and penetration testing to make sure that what the provider has said is actually real. The challenge with cloud platforms, and especially multi-tenant shared environments, is that ability to verify doesn't necessarily go down, but it changes. And the reason it changes is since all customers are sharing that infrastructure and that software, most providers are not going to let IT teams come in to the data center and even into the cage and specifically look at that environment and test it, because that would break the confidentiality agreements of all the other customers. So the way that you verify with cloud platforms and really any shared multi-tenant environment is by relying on a third-party opinion. And that's why industry certifications like SSAE and SOC 1 and SOC 2 and ISO 27001 are really critical, because now you have to verify by relying on third-party providers rather than your own internal team verifying that what the provider has said is actually real. So that trust but verify, trusting a provider to manage your data is a real concern, and we absolutely encourage clients to really, really dig on due diligence. It's that due diligence is different than what most IT organizations are used to.
And Stanton, what advice can you offer for managing the relationship with the provider? I'm talking about very specific things a CIO or business leader can do to build solid contractual agreements and working relationships over the long term.
So, good question. The working relationship with cloud platforms is different than a more traditional arrangement. In many instances, you're buying a utility platform, so there may not be somebody on the other end to talk to on a consistent basis. Of course, they're going to have support there for you, but it's not like a traditional arrangement where you may have a dedicated account manager that you meet with on a weekly basis or a monthly basis to review activity and are you satisfied. Most of these are real true utility platforms. It's the building blocks that are there for you to go build your applications, but it's up to you to make sure that they're performing the way you need them to perform. So I think, as we talk with CIOs and customers about how to evaluate these, there's sort of several tools you can use. We talked earlier about a really strong reliance on reviewing third-party opinions. Many times what we see is there's just a checkbox to say, do they have a SOC 1 or a SOC 2, without actually diving into the details of the report that was produced by a third-party auditor. So really diving into those details underlying the external compliance certifications is really, really critical, because a lot of times what that will then lead to is finding the gaps that maybe are in the report, but then you need to go find another audit report that fills a gap, or there potentially could be a gap that's not filled that could change your decision about buying that platform. We also highly recommend that customers talk with other customers using that platform. Unlike a more traditional arrangement where the service may be customized to you, when you're buying a cloud platform, you're buying a standardized service. So it's much easier to go talk to other customers that are using that service and are using it in the way that you're using it. So going and talking to other customers about how they operate and their happiness with that platform is really, really critical. So I would say those are really kind of the top two things that we recommend. There is, of course, a significant amount of due diligence that has to happen on the contracting side. But what's really important to remember is that that contract is much less flexible than a traditional outsourcing or third-party arrangement, because it's standardized for all customers. So really narrowing in and drilling down on the areas that can be negotiated is really key, and not spending on time redlining contracts when you know that the provider is not going to change either way, because that then creates a lot of animosity in the long-term arrangement.
Well, trust is obviously a big issue here. And of late, I've been hearing how it's often difficult to get in and really look under the hood of a cloud solution provider in terms of their security and BCDR plans. Is that really the case? As a CIO, how do you deal with that?
Absolutely it is. It's absolutely the case that for shared multi-tenant environments, not as much for private cloud type deployments where the situation or the system is dedicated to the customer, but anytime it's a shared environment, the ability to get under the covers in the traditional way that we're used to is very difficult. And that's the reason we talked about earlier, making sure to have a very strong focus on third-party compliance, and that provider has gone out and gotten the appropriate certifications. There's broad-based ones, and then there's also industry vertical specific certifications. So we encourage clients to really dig into those. It does not mean that it's not secure. It just means they have to verify in a different way than they're used to. When it comes to business continuity and disaster recovery, though, it is absolutely critical that we hold the providers to a very strong standard that they can prove that BCDR plan is in place. So not only would we expect to see a written plan, we'd also expect to see that plan executed once a year, and we want to see the results of how that test performed. Really digging into that detail of what is that test? Is it just a tabletop exercise? Is it actually the system went down and we failed over to another data center? So really digging into their testing of the DR plan is critical, remembering that, again, in contrast to a more traditional arrangement, that plan is not going to be custom to you, and likely you won't get to participate in that DR plan. It's all going to be run by the provider, but you need to do your due diligence to really dig down and understand what have they actually done. Is it a real test or a tabletop exercise?
Stanton, IT experts have told me that knowing where your data is and knowing who has access to it is key when it comes to cloud. My question then is this: considering the nature of cloud platforms, can we ever really achieve that?
It depends. If you are talking about a shared multi-tenant environment, I would say over time achieving that goal is going to become more and more difficult. And the reason that is that the way that the providers are able to scale these solutions is by spreading that data out across multiple data centers. Today, we're very much still in an environment where we would encourage clients to really press their providers on, I need to know exactly where my data is and what data center it's in, and it may be multiple data centers. So today, that's sort of a table stakes that you need to know where it is, right? The industry and governmental regulations have not necessarily caught up with where cloud is. So today, absolutely encourage clients to do that specifically for any data that they deem personally identifiable or compliance related. So in the short term, the answer is yes. I think in the long term, it's going to become more and more difficult as these new architectures continue to proliferate, which is spreading and sharding that data out over across multiple data centers, which allows a lot of the benefits that we see in these cloud platforms of limited to no downtime. Disaster recovery is inherent in the solution. So rather than needing a specific DR platform I'm going to fail over to, since the data is all spread out, I can put it all back together quickly. So there's a lot of benefits in these new architectures that clients want. But when you bump that up against, I need to know where my data is, then sometimes that creates a lot of conflict. Obviously in Europe, and we deal with a large number of European clients, the EU Data Privacy Directive is critically important, and so for in Europe, it's table stakes, right? I must know where my data is, and I must be able to dictate if it can leave the country or not. So it kind of depends on where that customer is. Are they in Europe, are they in the States, or are they in Asia and someplace else? And really truly understanding the local data privacy laws and the international data privacy laws is absolutely critical to be able to map that against which cloud platform you'd actually be able to take advantage of.
Now, cloud solution providers may do a great job with backup, security, and disaster preparedness, but let's face it, nothing is perfect. So how should CIOs be architecting their BCDR plans in today's cloud platform world?
Yeah, so the answer is yes, they are forgotten and neglected, and we are seeing an increased awareness of, if I have this solution in the cloud, because I can't verify in the way that I want to verify that the DR plan is working, I will need my own DR plan, right? Which then many times creates a problem for the business case. Because if I've planned X% of savings to adopt this cloud platform, but then I have to go build my own disaster recovery plan to accommodate for this, that can create challenges in the business case that if I had a 10% savings before, that 10% savings may get eaten up with my own DR plan. So, I mean, that's absolutely a critical area, and one, frankly, that is still fairly nascent. One of the things that we see emerging, and I would say this is still very much emerging, is cloud insurance. So the idea that because I can't verify and put the legal protections like liability, for example, into those provisions because the cloud providers won't agree to those, I now need to go buy cloud insurance that then gives me that extra amount of liability that I need to be able to protect my organization. Again, creates business case challenges and logistics challenges when customers were expecting simplicity, right? I just want to, cloud is easy, I only want to pay for what I use, and I want to get out whenever I can. There's a lot of dissonance today around, I thought this would be easier. And so we're still working through, especially when it comes to a lot of the emerging services, we're still working through a lot of those areas.
And Stanton, among the cloud solution vendors such as Amazon, Google, and Microsoft, do you see one taking the lead and rising up to become the top provider for cloud?
Great question. So the cloud platform space is incredibly innovative right now. So there's a huge number of entrants into this market. You mentioned Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. So they really have sort of industry-leading platform as a service systems, but the number and volume and breadth and depth of providers in this space is really exciting. Most of these, however, are still sort of in the startup stage. There are some other more traditional IT services vendors that are getting into this space, but one of the really interesting things that you are seeing is that there's a very strong interest in capturing the developer market. Today, there's a lot of focus on the infrastructure market, which is typically more of an IT-centric, more centralized business unit IT. I think a lot of organizations, Google, Microsoft, and Amazon clearly being three of the big ones, but a whole slew of other smaller ones are recognizing if you can capture that developer market and that developer mind share, that then leads to applications and that underlying infrastructure, because that's ultimately what the infrastructure is there for, is to run the applications. So there's a race right now to capture that developer mind share, and that's where you start to see the big guys. We think we will start to see the big guys doing a significant number of acquisition-related activity over the next kind of 3 to 5 years as that space continues to consolidate.
In our concluding segment, we take a look ahead and consider what the future may hold for cloud platforms. We began our report with an overview of cloud platforms and learned why they are fast becoming a mission-critical component of IT and business today. We then outlined the many benefits cloud platforms can bring to an organization, offered advice on selecting cloud platforms, and tips on managing the risk factors associated with cloud. In our concluding segment, we'll hear added advice from our expert, as well as consider the future of cloud platforms. Stanton, so how do we get our feet wet with cloud platforms? What approach makes sense today?
Sure. As we talked about earlier, really the best way to approach this is to start small. So what we always recommend is really you got to focus on the business benefits first. Rather than focusing on the technology, really kind of understand what are the business benefits for a specific workload. For example, can I get an application out to market faster, right? If there really is a true business benefit there, then the next step, mapping that back to the data that application processes. So if you can really start to think about that data in sort of rows and columns and break it down into here is the data that I want to move into that cloud platform within this specific application, and map that against sort of the criticalness, the level of compliance, personally identifiable information, that kind of thing. That then starts to, again, narrow the subset of cloud platforms that you may be able to take advantage of. So once you've done that, identified the business benefits, and then also sort of mapped that data, then at that point, you can start to do your due diligence about these slew of providers that are out there, both the big guys and the small guys, and start looking at the underlying technology to say, this is one I want to go prototype, and that's the key, is really focusing on prototype, iterative, pilot-type approaches for specific workloads rather than moving an entire application or a whole suite of applications over in one big bang.
Now, regarding your firm, ISG, how do they help organizations make good investments in cloud platforms?
Sure. So we think we have unparalleled access into the market, both the buy side, so customers that are buying cloud platforms, and the sell side, so the providers of these services. So because we advise on such a large number of transactions, we get a really broad scope of the market, and we have really deep relationships both on the buy and sell side. And so by leveraging those relationships, we think we have really unique insight into what's actually happening. So sort of forward-looking, here are the key players, here's where this provider's going, here's this Fortune 50 company that's taking advantage of that platform. So in terms of educating clients about who's doing what, both on the buy and sell side, we find is really valuable. We also find that we have really, really deep experience in working with providers to help clients understand what they can and can't negotiate, what providers are good at and what they're not good at, where they excel, where they struggle. And so we find that helps to really accelerate the process rather than spending hours, days and weeks negotiating a contract where we know that provider simply won't budge. We can point clients to areas where we know providers are willing to negotiate. And then finally, we have a lot of experience helping clients to look at their data and map their data against various thresholds around how the velocity of change, the level of compliance, how often that data, the level of integration between that cloud platform and the on-premises system. So helping to kind of map that data against a framework then helps to map that again back to which cloud platform could potentially be appropriate.
And Stanton, what is one key point our viewers should take away from our program today?
Sure, I would say with cloud platforms, our advice is get started, try, pilot, use an iterative approach. That's really where we see clients being successful, is taking advantage of these new platforms and not being afraid to try potentially new development languages, try a vendor that you've never necessarily worked for in the past or worked with in the past. The reason that's really important is I think a lot of large IT organizations, although rightly so, have created a really standardized set of services. Sometimes you get tunnel vision and you don't see what's out there. So the great benefit of these cloud platforms is that they are in your ability to try something, and if it works, grow it organically. If it doesn't work, get out quickly without a lot of time or expense is really, really important. So that's really the kind of key takeaway is get out there, try and pilot some of these platforms, and I think you'd be surprised on how productive some of these applications can make your workloads.
To wrap up our interview today, what do you anticipate for the future of cloud platforms?
Sure, I think as we talked about, there's a huge amount of innovation happening today. A lot of different players in the market. That's one of the reasons there's a lot of confusion in the market, is understanding who should I even not only contract with, but which one should I go try. So I think we're going to continue to see a huge amount of innovation in the market, maybe over the next 3 to 5 years. And then maybe in another 5 years, we're going to start to see a significant amount of consolidation of these cloud platforms. So as usual, the large players will start to gobble up the small players that sort of fit their profile, and we all see the larger guys trying to fill out their cloud stack. So there's going to be a significant amount of consolidation, which can benefit customers, but also can be risky for customers if something was acquired that doesn't necessarily fit your standard. That does sometimes create risk for customers, but we see a significant amount of innovation and a significant amount of consolidation.
Stanton Jones of Information Services Group, thank you for bringing us up to date on this important topic.
Thanks, Mike.
Well, that completes our report, Cloud Platforms, Opportunities and Risk Factors. I'm Michael Quinlan, and thanks for watching.